Hey, I'm Chance, and welcome to another Game Table Adventures. Today, we're going to talk about my favorite campaign settings. Just the favorites, not everyone I know and not everyone I've heard of. Not only am I going to talk about what they are, what system they're for, but why I love them. This video is actually a request from a viewer. Giller Morobles 887. If I butchered the shit out of your name, I apologize. I'll make sure to put the username up on screen here after the credit or opening or whatever the hell we call it. Let's talk about it. Gweller, Marble, this guy. This guy requested it. Okay, so how do we kick this off? My favorite campaign settings. And obviously, this isn't stuff that... Where the fuck to start on that one? Before we get too far into it, go ahead and go down below and comment your favorite campaign setting, and let's see if it's one of the ones that's right up my alley, or if it's one you think I should check out. Go ahead, comment down below. And please, like, comment, subscribe, and share. I mean, why not? You're already here. So how do we start this thing off? Well, I guess campaign setting, to be a campaign setting, is the place and the events and the other things that are outlined creating the setting for the players to play in. Obviously, I'm only going to be talking about settings related to role-playing games. And I'm going to try to get away from things like Farscape, Stargate, Star Trek, Star Wars. While those are all big loves of mine, huge sci-fi nerd, that's not quite what I think he was getting at. And because those are more franchises than settings, obviously being shows, movies, and books before they were role-playing game settings, I'm going to leave those out of today. Otherwise, half of this would probably be those. But let's start with my favorite, the dark, the mysterious, the ever terrifying demi-realm of dread. That's right, Ravenloft. Dun dun dun! Now, Ravenloft is a great setting, and it comes from a set of adventures back in AD&D. I'll let that soak in. This came from a set of adventures that could be dropped into any campaign setting, before eventually being translated into its own campaign setting. A little complicated. But in 3.5, it got released as a series of books. An entire fucking series. A campaign setting, with its own player's handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, monster manuals, books about random shit, an arsenal guide, and a campaign setting guide proper. And then books that had to do with the various territories inside the campaign setting. So I guess you'd say that it's one of my favorite settings for 3.0 and 3.5. One of my absolute favorites. And that's where it started off. For me, anyways. I never played the original setting. I never played the original modules. I played in the setting for 2nd edition in high school. But I don't actually know if that was There were things to it. For my DM had books. I just don't remember them. Never got to look at them fully because being the DM, Nick was always really good about making sure that players only looked at parts of books that pertained directly to their character. And for a lot of us, what he'd do is he'd sit us down and ask what our character concept is and give us a rundown of available options for that. I played a really weird character. It was high school and I was edgy, so I played a lone wolf ninja. So, let's see how many people understand that reference in the comments. If this gets any comments at all. But, it was one of my favorites. And when I came to DMing, which came about more in the 3035 time, and I continued as a player in 2nd edition right up until about 3.5 coming out. Then I switched over to 3.5. There were some issues in balance for 3.0. Essentially, everything was underpowered but the monk. They fixed that in 3.5, but it was a little tedious. In 3.0, if you had a monk in your party, and everybody wanted to play a fucking monk, there was no point in being anything other than a monk. So, at least where I went to high school, you saw a lot of parties that were just groups of monks. It was ridiculous. Then 3.5 came out with better balance. They trimmed back the monk a little bit, not much, and they cranked everybody else up to match the monk, which was a better option. Now, anyways, that's aside. Ravenloft had stuff in it that made it fucking unique. All the classes got variant class features. For instance, the Paladin. The Paladin was good, but his mount... Oh, that was probably an evil creature subjugated by the power of the Paladin. Not truly loyal. It was all sorts of little things. Little niggling things, like there weren't half-orcs. There were Calibans. Humans mutated by the dark power to be different and interesting. And Caliban is a play on the word cannibal, or at least to my understanding. And it was definitely pretty fucking cool. Now, oh god, I hate this squeaky chair. There were a lot of things. New critters, and oh my god, did vampires get an upgrade. Vampires got an upgrade of power by age category. And oh boy, did you not want to fuck with an ancient vampire. The older they got, the more powerful they got, and the deadlier they got. Something that in D&D terms is just beautiful. It's these little touches, little horror tweaks on classic classes and races. The races didn't exactly behave the same. And there was a new playable race called the Vistani. They were humans, but they were gypsies. And no, I don't mean like the hot hippie chick that you hang out with and she wears a gypsy skirt and you drool over her during your high school lunch. No, I mean gypsies. Like the magical fortune tellers who are mysterious. It was a little racist, kind of. Well, so I'm glad they didn't call them gypsies. But when I say old school, old-timey gypsies, you understand what I mean. Like the 1980s idea of what a gypsy was, where they came and they just had unstoppable magical powers for whatever reason. You know, I kind of feel like, as far as racism goes, the gypsies got better end of the deal, because I'd rather be seen as some sort of unstoppable magical force not to be fucked with than to be ridiculed and disparaged. I mean, I guess they were probably ridiculed and disparaged in reality, but in the 1980s and 90s, they got it pretty good. Nobody wanted to fuck with them. Or at least I wouldn't. I don't want to, like, have a curse or something. But, the Vistani get to lay curses, and they were playable with a level adjustment. A pretty high level adjustment, which is why you had the erase option for the half Vistani. Which is less game-shattering, except when you play a bard. Bards have become a stereotype now. But they weren't back in the early 2000s. Nobody wanted to play a bard because you weren't sure if it was a fighter or a rogue or a spellcaster or if they just played the lute really magically. I played a bard. I played a bard assassin. Most of you old school players are going to get what I say when I say a bard assassin. One time I straight killed a dude because I was like, summon loot, summon loot. I broke the loots over the dude's head and then I stabbed him through the neck with the loot handles. It was one of the more epic times of me playing D&D back in my high school days. And it was around the time I started getting into DMing myself. And anybody from those days that might happen to be watching this, well, I can only hope that you message me, I guess. Fuck, I'd love to play a game with the olds guys. Back in the day, we were pretty hardcore. Except we had no real understanding of the lore, and we just did the fuck ever we wanted. God, I've rambled. One of the things that makes Ravenloft is, wait for it, the mists. And the mists are crazy. They form walls between the various countries. Thick, like 2-mile-long stretches of perpetual fog that never ends. And the only people who can traverse these mists, the Vistani. Their powers are granted by the dark powers that rule the world. And Ravenloft has connections to pretty much every major campaign setting. You want Greyhawk? Well, Vecna. He's been to Ravenloft. Or, perhaps you're a fan of Krynn, the Dragonlance campaign setting. Well, their big BBEG, he's been there too. Strahd, nobody knows where he's from. But there's also been a guy from Forgotten Realms, and I can't remember his fucking name. I don't have the books anymore because of a house fire. I would literally kill to get those books again. It was my absolute favorite setting. Was it cliche? Oh, yes. But it was dark, it was gritty, it was gothic, it was edgy. Oh, the edge! Edge hard. But I guess that's how we all were back then. Fuck me, dude. Like, you never really think about these things until you think about these things. Mocha, what are you doing? Have you decided to come up and say hello? My channel mascot. He's a dog. Mwah. Mocha bear. Mocha bear. Pain in the butt. Pain in the butt. Oh, get the eye boogies. There I go. Got it. Got it. You just look so surprised. Fucking, But that covers my absolute favorite, well, almost favorite 3.5.3.0 campaign setting. Because now we have to switch gears to my other great love. The Iron Kingdoms! Okay, that was maybe a little intense. But how can you beat swords, sorcery, giant fucking steam powered robots that kill shit? A necromantic empire capable of destroying everyone. Can't really, can you? And it was a campaign setting for 3.0 before it was anything else, and it evolved into a miniatures combat game, which I still play. Iron Kingdoms would go on to make War Machines and Hordes, which, with the latest Mark IV, has become just War Machines, with everything else wrapped into it from Hordes. And its own role-playing game called the Iron Kingdoms. And with that, for 5th edition, it's got a recent release called Iron Kingdoms Requiem, which is a pretty good campaign setting. I've looked over it. But what's always going to strike my fancy and nostalgia is the 3.0-3.5 campaign setting. And the book was fucking classic. It had a series of books, all of which were great, with deep lore, with rich backstories, and interesting mechanics such as focus and fury, and how you could become a person who could wield massive tamed beasts in battle, or you could command the strength of those steam-powered robots called jacks, ranging in everything from a laborjack to a warjack, and ready to kick some fucking ass. Oh man. Talk about one brutal campaign setting. And the world was just unique. So much to it that one couldn't simply wrap it all up in just a couple of statements. Great countries like Cygnar, my faction that I play in the miniatures game, Khador, which is kind of like Soviet Russia with magic, and Empress instead of like a Soviet. The brutality of these Russian motherfuckers. Lille, which is pretty much France. Ord, which might as well be Scotland, but for some reason is just north of Lille. It's weird. It's all complicated and kind of idiosyncratic. Everything is just kind of just a little off. And that's what makes it great. It's not the world we live in. That, I think, is the key sign of a good campaign setting. It's just close enough to what we understand to be recognizable, but not so far off the scale as to be the modern world. Oh god, that one's a hard tough to sell. And it had races like the Trollkin, replacing the orcs. It had two kinds of elves, the Nis and the Iosians. It had gobbers, no halflings or gnomes. It had its own flavor. And it was really good. You know, it had all your basic stuff without too much of it. It had variants for paladins and its own gods and monks, and they kind of went with it. They just kind of went full send, which I respect. It is just one of those things that, as far as campaign settings go, I absolutely love. Just so well done. So well done. What else do I love? Well, those are my two favorite campaign settings. But there's another one that comes up, and you're going to start to see kind of a pattern with me. Dragon Mech. Now, what makes Dragon Mech cool? Well, first of all, it's steampunk. And you can't help but fucking love steampunk. But what else does it have? Oh, that's right. You guessed it. Giant fucking robots. And giant fucking monsters to fight the giant fucking robots. It was like Pacific Rim before Pacific Rim was a thing. Except these giant robots were based in magic and all sorts of crazy shit. They had steam-powered cyborgs and fucking rangers and cities that were also giant mechs that wandered around to avoid the devastation. You could have an entire campaign that lasted inside one city mech because it was so vast and moved so slowly. Battle against dragons and creatures from the moon set on devastating the world and making it their own. It was a bizarre campaign setting, and it was a third party, and they put out books galore. Everything from mech guides to fucking pre-planned adventures. And it was well written. Absolutely well written. Had some holes, and it was a little more zany and cartoony than something dark like Iron Kingdoms or Ravenloft. But the zaniness had an underlying seriousness to it. You could still take it seriously. You could still immerse yourself in the world. But it didn't really line up with any other campaign settings. You couldn't, mix it in with something else. No, Dragon Mech was its own fucking thing. And it needed to be. It put a whole new scale to fucking D&D. And it made you feel like your character was so small and insignificant compared to all the other events going on in the world. In a world full of heroes, what the fuck's a hero? Your average commoner was probably a ranger or something. Most of the drudgery, the commoners, they were pretty much dead or slaves or something. The scale of the devastation was just ridiculous because, how could it not have such a high scale? The moon was literally falling out of the fucking sky and alien creatures were coming down from the heavens to kill everybody. It was an interesting and apocalyptic campaign setting that really stood the test of time. I think it still stands up to this day. Definitely something I would play in. My experience with running the setting, however, has had some folly. And I think that's because in the earlier times in which I tried to run it, I didn't have the right party. I didn't have the right group. And I think that it's one of those settings that if you're going to run it, you need to have the right group. God, fuck. What are the campaign settings do I should? Give me a second here to make an aside. Forgotten Realms. We'll call this an honorable mention because it's not one of my favorite campaign settings, but God has it stood the test of time. Sort of. It has unfortunately had some issues, and a lot of the changes and choices made since the beginning of Wizards of the Coast have not stood the test of time so well. Why would I say that? Well, they've literally made changes to the story in the novels to fit whatever it was they were trying to do with the system for Dungeons & Dragons at the time. A la 4th edition and the Spell Plague. It was a stupid, if not horrible fucking choice, story-wise, and I'm pretty sure that the guys at Wizards of the Coast still probably don't even know what they did wrong to fucking fail so hard. I'd like to think they learned their lesson when 5th edition came out and it sold better numbers, but let's be honest, they thought that they had a radically cool new system that was just gonna blow everyone away with 4th edition. And they failed. A problem with what I think makes a good campaign setting is that the campaign setting can stand the test of time. And you don't need to tweak the world to fit the system. If you're going to do something like that with something as classic as Forgotten Realms, you need to tweak the system to fit the setting. It's something that Ravenloft, Dragon Mech, and Iron Kingdoms did, and even Dragonlance, arguably. They managed in 3.0 and 3.5 that 4th edition and Forgotten Realms failed to do in their own times. Now that Forgotten Realms is the primary campaign setting of D&D, and it's become somewhat more generic even in 5th edition, with the exclusion of so much of the world itself. Talking about my favorite campaign settings makes me think of the way that other campaign settings have failed to have the same kind of noteworthiness or staying power. Forgotten Realms is extremely, extremely generic. And the things that have made it stand out have been ground down over time because the people who own the IP don't know how to let it breathe. It has name recognition and has a lot of history attached to it. And that's just something that, God, how do I put this? Sorry, I had to let the dog out. Now, we were talking about Forgotten Realms, and it was a nice, quick little aside, but its failing is often how it's used. And then there's the other side of that spectrum, where not enough of it got translated forward to really have any meaning. And by that I'm talking about the core campaign setting for 3.5, Greyhawk. Another great setting that admittedly died on the vine because not enough of it, hell, not even its actual full map, got translated forward past its 2nd edition incarnation. Another one of my favorite settings is Dragonlance. And I say this with a bit of hesitation because I loved the books as a kid, and they have problems. First of all, nobody knows how to represent Kinder at all. And they seem to play a Kinder as if it's some sort of fourth wall breaking, god modding ridiculous fucking creature that can just steal anything on accident. And that's not really how Kinder work. DMs use them annoyingly. Players try to play them terribly. I will not play Dragonlance. I will love it from a distance. But Dragonlance brought something new to the table. New classes, new skills, new dynamics, new maps, new races. It did everything that Forgotten Realms did in 3.5, but it did it so much better, and with fewer books. In fact, to my knowledge, there's only the one Dragonlance campaign setting book. Now, I think I could probably stop this video right here. As far as my favorite campaign settings that aren't Stargate, Farscape, Star Wars. God, but it's hard to really... And there are some campaign settings I love that I can't remember the name of. Such as the core campaign setting of D20 Future. Or Dark Matter, for that matter. There was a lot of good stuff that was put out for D20 Modern. Unfortunately, D20 Modern got treated like Wizards of the Coast's unwanted, unloved stepchild. And while it got stuff, some pretty good supplements, and definitely a fair few books, it kind of languished on the vine when I think it could have been something special. It could have been something really fucking powerful. And it got kind of forgotten. It was also available for third-party support, but nobody wanted to do anything with it. But it offered something that I think was unique in the world of gaming. The everyday, the modern world. With a supernatural or sci-fi twist. The core book showed you how to run pretty much anything you wanted to do in the modern day. Well, when combined with the weapons locker and a few other books. But it could have been so much more. And I think in some ways it succeeded. But it just kind of died there. Now, I'd also be remiss or whatever. I'd be fucking up things. I can't remember how to pronounce that word, and you know what? I'd be fucking up things if I didn't mention Starfinder. Another great setting, well written, and again, arguably on a system that never really caught on. It has the same problems as D20 Modern, and then some. And this could be that sci-fi role-playing is just not as popular as it is to me, or it could be that Paizo underestimated what they had and wanted to focus more on Pathfinder. And Starfinder's system is not easy. It's not intuitive to pick up. And with that said, crucify me in the comments if you must. Pathfinder 2e is hot garbage. It is overpowered, trite, hot garbage. I don't like the progression. I don't like the way they did cross-classing. I don't like the way they did skills. There is not a single solitary piece of 2e that I did not hate. Oh my god, the second edition of Pathfinder was just heinous. I have to love original Pathfinder because it was just 3.5. Granted, they did some things I didn't care for, but like cross-classing was just fine in fucking Dungeons and Dragons 3.5. I don't know why they would get rid of cross-classing for Pathfinder, but whatever, you know what? No. And they got rid of prestige classes, to my understanding, so I've only played one Pathfinder campaign, and I wasn't particularly impressed. The whole time I'm just thinking, God, I'd rather be playing 3.5. But that pretty much covers my thoughts on campaign settings, at least for right now. This is supposed to be my favorites, not my least favorites, and I don't care to go into every campaign setting I've ever played in. My top 3 would have to be Ravenloft. Dark, it's gritty, it's interesting. Iron Kingdoms. A lot of the same gothic atmosphere, but with steam-powered robots, and Dragon Mech, which was just wacky, and I couldn't help but love it. That said, there is a lot to be loved out there. And there's a lot that I think all of you love and have to share. And that's really what makes this hobby so great, is that we can share with people the things we love. And that's not a bad thing. Arguably, the best DMs make their own worlds. They make their own rules. But some people need that preset adventure. They need that canonicity that they can follow to the letter. They need those additional rules. And not to drag on any TMs, there are some people who need pre-written adventures. There's nothing wrong with that. But for as much as I love campaign settings, and as much as there are ones that I love, time periods and such, with all that said, keep adventuring.